Well, hi, y'all. Welcome back. You may have noticed that the horrors persist, and not in a fun way. We have yet to fully appease the old ones, so we plod forward until they've decided that we've suffered enough, I guess. I know it looks even worse around here. Try not to worry about it. We're here now, and we're doing our best. Where is here, you may ask? Why, the Horror Diner, of course. If you're a returning customer of the diner, I'm so happy to see you again, and so very happy that the old ones allowed you to live. But if you're visiting our establishment for the very first time, we're thrilled you decided to stop by. I'm Spooky Pie, your waitress, your chef, and your new friend who's going to sit down and talk about horror with you. Here at the Horror Diner, we talk about any kind of horror media you can think of. Books, movies, podcasts, video games, TV shows, whatever else. But basically, if it's horror, then it's fair game. Everything is on the menu. But that's not all. Every episode, we also cook up a little something that goes with the piece of media we're talking about. Sometimes that's easier than others, and other times a work won't mention food and we'll have to get creative on what our themed eat is, but we're nothing if not adaptable here. And we have to be, or else we'd have gone mad a long time ago. Anyhoodle, you may have looked at the subject we are covering today and wondered, how did we get here? Well, honey, I am so glad you asked. So, a bit back, I was gabbing with a good friend of the channel and frequent customer of the diner, Hatter, who streams over the Grognard Garage, check him out. And since this is a friend of mine, you could probably guess that the conversation was nerdy as hell. And as people who know me in real life will tell you, I'm a pretty casual fan of the anime JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And because of this very casual passing interest in it, he jokingly said to me, "Phantom Blood essay when?" And we laughed because, haha, funny, right? And then I went, wait, no, I totally could make a video essay on Phantom Blood. And here I am, making a video essay about Phantom Blood. Which, okay, so if we're being honest, I never pictured myself becoming a fan of the series up until not too long ago. Like, there was a considerable portion of time where all I knew was that things were named after bands and songs, and that characters got powers from stands? Which, I'll be honest, for a very long time, I thought it was literally from the way they stood, because one of the only other things I knew about the series was people doing dramatic JoJo poses. It definitely made a lot more sense when I found out that stands were basically personas, or I guess technically personas are stands. But to be fair, a lot of media has drawn inspiration from JoJo. But long before stands, which didn't become a part of JoJo until part 3, we had the somewhat, by comparison to later parts, grounded story that was Phantom Blood. While later installments of the series would give us stories about a nice boy who just wants to hang out with his friends and get fancy shoes but can't because he's the protagonist, and an angelically beautiful boy in his quest to become the head of the mafia, and a Florida girl who is wrongly imprisoned in order to save her father from a priest who's in love with the guy who murdered their great-great ancestor, JoJo began its life as horror. I'm serious. Sit back down. If you've been watching or reading, horror manages to be an undercurrent or present as themes at some point in nearly every part of the series. But Phantom Blood doesn't have themes of horror. Phantom Blood is horror. It's even in the name. We have the foggy, menacing streets of Victorian England, dark, crumbling castles, and of course, vampires. It's gothic horror. I don't make the rules. But before I spend the next, God, I don't even know how long this is going to wind up being, talking your ear off about Phantom Blood, let's get you something to eat. I promise it'll make my yammering much more enjoyable. In honor of our good boy Johnathon and his hamon, aka Sunshine Magic, we're going to be making sunshine pie. Yes, we're still in our David Byrne kitchen, but what are we going to do other than carry on? So let's get into it. You will need unsalted butter, 1 8-ounce stick for the tart dough and 6 tablespoons for the custard, salt, 1/4 teaspoon for the dough and 1/2 teaspoon for the custard, vanilla, 1/2 teaspoon each for the dough and custard, 1 egg for the dough and 3 for the custard, 1/2 cup flour, 1/2 cup sugar for the dough and 1 1/3 cups for the custard, and of course, 1 lemon. So let's start with the dough. In a stand mixer, add your butter and sugar and cream them. Add vanilla and scrape down the sides with a spatula as necessary. Add your egg and salt and continue mixing. Add all the flour in at once and mix slowly until it's fully combined. Divide the dough into 2 equal portions. Place on parchment paper and flatten into discs. Wrap the discs tightly in the parchment paper and refrigerate for 30 to 60 minutes. Preheat your oven to 375 degrees. Once the dough is chilled, place it on a lightly floured surface and roll it out until it's roughly 12 inches in diameter. Roll the dough up onto your rolling pin and place it over your tart pan, unrolling slowly. Press the dough into the tart pan and roll the pin around the edges to cut off any extra dough. Cover the dough with foil or parchment paper and fill with beans or pie weights. If the dough is still chill, you can blind bake it now, otherwise give it a few more minutes in the fridge. Bake for 12 minutes, then remove the crust from the oven and remove the pie weights. Prick the dough with a fork and bake again for 5 to 10 minutes until it's beginning to brown. Set the pastry aside to cool and lower the oven temperature to 350 degrees. Now it's time to make the filling. Chop the lemon into chunks and add that to a blender, along with melted butter. No, you don't get to see it. Join the melted butter tier on Patreon if that's what you're into, as well as sugar, vanilla, salt, and eggs. Blend until smooth. Strain the lemon mixture with a fine mesh strainer over a medium-sized bowl. Pressing with a spatula is needed to get as much as possible through the strainer. Pour the mixture into the pie crust and bake for 30 to 35 minutes. Once it is done, let it cool and move the pie to the fridge. At this point, it was 5 in the morning and I needed to go to bed. So, time skip and an outfit change. What are you gonna do? While we made this pie to represent Johnathon, what vampire story is complete without a bitchy blonde bisexual here to ruin the party? So, for Dio, we're going to make a blood raspberry sauce to top our pie. For the sauce, you will need 3 1/3 cups raspberries, either fresh or frozen, 1 teaspoon lemon juice, and 4 to 6 tablespoons sugar. Add all your ingredients to a saucepan and bring to a boil while mashing the raspberries with a spatula to break them down. Once it comes to a boil, remove it from the heat, and if you need to, you can adjust with more sugar or lemon juice if you'd like. Strain the sauce to remove all the raspberry seeds. Press firmly with a spatula to extract all the pulp. The sauce will thicken up as it cools, so give it a second. Once it's properly thickened, go ahead and splatter that blood all over your pie. It's looking pretty tasty, but let's give it a moment to set up, and in the meantime, let's head over to my office. Welcome once more to our sister location. We've been expecting you, Eggs Benedict. Enjoy your casual bongos. Yes, I'm going to keep milking this dumb bit until I get my house back, and you can't stop me. Let's move on, shall we? I'll freely admit that when I first got into Jojo, I didn't give Phantom Blood as fair a shake as I should have on the first go. It wasn't until part 2, Battle Tendency, that I started to really get into it, and I initially think I was a bit harsh on it and its protagonist on a first go. I thought Johnathon was not as interesting as the protagonists of later parts. He seemed subdued compared to bombastic trash bag of my heart Joseph. The day I saw a man so beautiful I started to cry, I gave him $20, it was all I had. Stoic badass Jotaro, or even gentle yet somehow incredibly menacing at times Giorno. And it's just not fair to compare anyone to Josuke or Jolene because they're perfect. But in going back to Phantom Blood, I came to appreciate Johnathon's true strength. Not that he's built like an absolute beast of a man who could crush your head like a grape, but Johnathon is a character faced with horrible cruelty and circumstance, and yet retains compassion, kindness, and most impressively considering what he goes through, hope. This story throws the worst things it possibly can at this boy, and even in the bleakest moments, he hasn't let the cruelty done to him make him into something cruel. He begins and ends the series with a good and noble heart. And some people might think that's boring. I'm sure they also think that puppies and baby birds are boring. Monsters. I, however, am not a monster. Usually. And I like Johnathon Joestar. But before we get into my opinions, we need to dig into the first installment and what would go on to be one of my favorite series. But before we do that, as always, I want to create a safe space here at the diner, so I wanted to give you a heads up out the gate about the trigger warnings present in this media. They are animal death, a brief spot of infanticide, body horror for days, especially in the manga, extreme gore, again, especially in the manga. Also, I will be honest, the manga came out in the 80s, and there are a couple portrayals that aged like milk, and I'm not going to pretend that they didn't. As I kind of alluded to in the trigger warnings, I'm going to be talking about both the anime and the manga in this. I like both. The manga does go more in depth, but the anime is a faithful adaptation, so I'm not going to recommend one over the other. There was also a film adaptation, but it was very poorly received, is now in the Shueisha vaults where nobody can get to it, and is at this point considered lost media, so I could not watch it. So, just the anime and the manga here. As per usual, before I can go into any sort of analysis, I'm going to be completely spoiling both of those things. So, if you do not want to be spoiled for an almost 40-year-old manga series, or an anime that is 14 years old this year, skip to the timestamp below. For the rest of y'all still here, let's get into it. We begin our story not with the titular Jojo of the Bizarre Adventure fame, but with a very angry-looking blonde kid. This little jerk's name is Dio Brando, and he's going to be a problem for the next couple hundred years or so. Dio's perfectly awful father, Dario, is dying, and with his last awful breath, hands Dio a letter telling him to go find a man named George Joestar. 12 years prior to this, Dario was out being a nefarious asshole on a dark and stormy night when he came across a carriage that had fallen off a cliff in the storm. The carriage contained a husband, wife, and their baby son. Assuming everyone in the carriage was dead, Dario began looting the corpses. They weren't, though. The father and the infant had survived. The father came to consciousness while being fleeced and assumed Dario was a good Samaritan here to help him. Dario played along with this ruse, and the man, George Joestar, believed he owed him a great debt because of this. Dario is terrible and of course frittered away any money he had leached out of the Joestars, but now on his deathbed is sending Dio off to go big George's problem. Dario dies, and Dio all but spits on his grave, and we finally move on to the actual hero of the story. Johnathon Joestar, Jojo to his friends and the baby from the carriage, is getting his ass completely handed to him after he jumped into a fight to defend a young girl named Erina who is being bullied by the local youths. Erina is clearly charmed by this, although Johnathon insists that it was simply the duty of a gentleman, and above all else, this little Crandall wants to be a gentleman. He does leave her with his handkerchief, though. But Johnathon's day is only going to get worse. Upon returning home, a carriage pulls up, and Dio fucking Brando jumps out to ruin his life. He immediately is just completely awful. He responds to Johnathon politely greeting him by being abusive to Johnathon's dog Danny and picking a fight with Johnathon.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
George Joestar, though, totally oblivious. He welcomes the little psychopath in with open arms, telling him from now on he'll be treated like he's his own son. Great. Johnathon is too good for this world and tries to put Dio's initial behavior behind them, offering to carry his bag to his room for him while Dio investigates Chekhov's Aztec death mask that's hanging on the wall. Realizing Johnathon as being an appallingly good person, I guess, Dio pulls himself away from the future plot device to beat the tar out of Johnathon for touching his bags, leaving Johnathon in a puddle lamenting how he just wanted to be friends with him. Things really don't get any better for Johnathon after this. As time passes, his father George begins to obviously favor Dio, saying how much smarter and more well-managed the little delinquent is than Johnathon, and doling out honestly pretty unfair punishments to our hero. Moving an indeterminate amount of time forward, Johnathon is now a teenager and appears to have been using this time to get stacked, but nonetheless, first thing we see of this slightly older version of him is him getting into a boxing match with Dio, who, as is a trend, hands him his ass. When they go back to the house, Dio proceeds to steal Johnathon's watch and then attempt to take Chekhov's Aztec death mask. But George catches him. Refusing to believe anything bad about this monster child, George assumes he's just curious about the mask and tells him how on the way home from receiving the mask, he was in a terrible carriage accident that resulted in the death of his wife. Dio, not giving two shits about the pain of this man who has been nothing but kind to him, asks how much the mask is worth, and when George tells him basically nothing, he puts it back, seemingly no longer interested in it. Fast forward, Johnathon is busy having a terrible day as usual. None of the local youths want to hang out with him because on top of physically destroying this boy, Dio has also been annihilating his character with rumors to anyone who will listen. But while he's out by the river lamenting this with his dog Danny, a very shy girl creeps up, leaving a basket of grapes for him with his handkerchief in it. Turns out this is Erina, the girl who he'd come to the defense of earlier, and this at least sparks off the first bit of okay Johnathon has had in his life in a while. They become friends, spend all their time together, and pretty soon Johnathon is smitten. Dio finds out about this and is really mad. We don't have time to unpack that right now. Not wanting Johnathon to have nice things, Dio tries to make a move on Erina, which she of course does not want, and in a bad bitch move, literally washes her mouth out with dirty puddle water after he kisses her. People will say Erina is a flat character, and to you I say, get out of my house, that woman is a queen. Anyway, Dio is enraged. Of course he is. But Johnathon gets wind of what Dio pulled and runs back to the house, ready to go absolutely ham on him. It actually starts going Jonathan's way for once because Erina was involved and he's mad as hell. And he's actually getting the upper hand on Dio, and over the course of the fight, some of Dio's blood splatters on Chekhov's Aztec death mask. Take a shot every time I say that. George shows up to break the boys up and takes Dio's side as per usual, and man, fuck George, I'm sorry, but come on now. Jonathan's life is back to being terrible, and perhaps more terrible than before. Erina, being a proper Victorian lady, is too ashamed to face Johnathon after the Dio incident and has been avoiding him. And when he thinks his life can't get any worse, fucking Dio tricks the gardener into killing Jonathan's dog. Yes, you heard me, he kills the dog. I want you all to think about that when you're making your Dio thirst traps, people. And for that matter, your Heathcliff thirst traps too. Is this what you like, internet sexually frustrated men who kill dogs rather than confront their attraction to an unattainable person? Is this what you like?
That fucking do anything for you? Megadeth?
Subscribe for my campaign for justice for Danny. In the anime, you don't really see anything when this happens, thankfully. The manga does show some stuff, so please be aware of that. The trigger warnings I mentioned are there for a reason. 7 years pass. We're now in 1888, and Johnathon has gotten jacked as hell. Dio is still terrible, and George Joestar is wasting away in his bed from an unknown sickness. And of course, still favoring Dio for some reason. But Johnathon is a good man and not going to let this stop him. He's apparently studying to be an archaeologist, so he's been looking into the Aztec death mask. He discovers when a drop of blood is given to the mask, it grows pinchers, I guess? These little guys that latch into the back of your head. Weird, right? So he goes to his father's enormous home library to see if there are any books about this mask. In the process, he stumbles across the letter that Dario Brando had sent along with his son Dio. In this letter, Dario talks about the symptoms he's having leading up to his death that seem an awful lot like the mysterious unknown sickness George has come down with. So, Johnathon catches Dio en route to delivering a mysterious medicine and accuses him of trying to poison his father. They get in a fight because, of course they do. While Phantom Blood might be horror, it is still a battle shonen. But Johnathon is built like a brick house now. While Dio has been scheming to get the Joestar fortune, Johnathon has been busy turning into an absolute beast, and for once, he completely hands Dio's ass to him with not a ton of effort on his part. The house servants are alerted and interrupt the fight, but Johnathon declares he's going to find out what was in that medicine and send Dio to prison. So he heads to London to find an antidote for whatever poison has been given to his father, leaving George in the care of 3 doctors with instructions not to take anything from anyone else. While Johnathon sets off to go save his father, at the Joestar mansion, Dio investigates the stone mask, discovering how it works and planning to use it to kill Johnathon when he gets back. In London, Johnathon finds himself in a dark, broody, lawless place called Ogre Street, since he learned the poison originated from here. 3 thugs immediately try to jump him, one of them being a guy with a top hat with saw blades. This is probably an homage to Oddjob and James Bond, but it does come off a little silly. But to be fair, the way Jojo peppers absolute absurdity into otherwise dramatic plots is part of why I love it. Anyway, Johnathon makes short work of the 3 of them, and Top Hat Guy, recognizing Johnathon could have killed him but didn't, agrees to help take Johnathon to the store that sold the poison. It should be noted that the guy with the top hat's name is REO Speedwagon. But please stick with me. Oh, made himself into a circle. You're so cute. While this is going on, Dio is back home picking fights so he can test how effective the mask is at killing people. He gets the opportunity pretty quickly because if there's one thing Dio is good at, it's being annoying and making people angry. He crams the mask on one of his opponents, and just like when he'd experimented, the tentacle pincher things come out of the back and latch into the man's skull. And at first, it seems like that's that. It just kills people. Until the dead man comes back to life as a vampire. This doesn't go at all the way Dio planned, and the only reason he doesn't get completely destroyed is because the sun comes up. When he hauls himself back to the Joestar mansion, Johnathon has returned with both the poison cellar and Speedwagon in tow. They confront Dio, and Father of the Year George Joestar hears the whole thing. The cops are now here to take Dio away. And that's it. that's the end. He goes quietly, and that's the last we see of him.
I'll be the roundabout.
Yeah, no, I lied. Instead of being taken in by the cops, Dio decides that it's time to become a vampire and pulls out the stone mask. He tries to stab Johnathon so he can use his blood to activate the mask, but stabs George instead when he throws himself in front of his son, doing the one decent thing he's done for Jojo in this whole thing. And I'm supposed to be sad, I think, but I'm not. I'm sorry. I hate George Joestar. Anyway, Dio slams the mask on his face and the police attempt to gun him down, but they're bad at their job and totally think he's dead, but don't really check the body. Bang up job, fellas. So George dies, telling Johnathon not to blame Dio because he's gotta get one last one in before he goes. While everyone who isn't me is busy being concerned that George has just died, Dio resurrects as a vampire and goes on a cop killing spree. All the while, Johnathon stands there in shock, and Speedwagon gives increasingly more panicked commentary. Dude, you were like a cold-blooded killer 5 pages ago. Okay. Johnathon kinda hangs out until all the cops are dead, and Speedwagon is injured by one of their limbs slingshotting at him in the chaos. It's battle time. Johnathon thinks back on every single time Dio has absolutely ruined his life, which is like a lot.
Here's an itemized list of 30 years of disagreements.
Sweet Jesus.
Dio gets lit on fire, so the house gets lit on fire. The battle that occurs here is honestly the coolest one in this entire part. It's more climactic than the actual climactic battle. In the end, Johnathon manages to impale Dio on a statue in the burning building, and Dio seemingly burns to death. If you've looked at the timestamp of this video, you probably already figured out that that fucking guy isn't actually dead. But anyway, Johnathon's father is dead, his ancestral home is burned to the ground, Dio is sort of dead, and Johnathon has sustained some pretty insanely bad injuries. A few days later, while Johnathon is convalescing in the hospital, Speedwagon comes to see him, but our best girl Erina is there taking care of Johnathon and tells him to hit the fucking bricks. At least in the manga she doesn't in the anime. The anime really plays down what a bad bitch Erina is, and I think that's a real shame. Regardless, Erina is back in the picture. Yay! Her and Johnathon are reconnecting, love is in the air, and while this is going on, the poison seller has gone back to the ruins of the Joestar mansion to loot the place. So Dio, who is only mostly dead, manages to attack him and come back all the way to life with his blood. Great. Good going. We have a small time skip, and Dio has turned the poison seller into one of his minions, and he's in London to recruit Jack the Ripper? Because of course he is. Meanwhile, Erina is helping Johnathon get rehabilitated by taking him out on walks. He has to use a cane currently, but he's improving. On one of these walks, the pair encounter an interesting individual in an ornate top hat. This is Baron Sapelli, and he's here to teach Johnathon hamon, which is basically sunlight magic, which is, useful if your main foe is a vampire. He punches Johnathon so hard it knocks the wind out of him, but also fixes all his injuries. And somehow this freak is the ancestor of beautiful Disney Prince Caesar from Part 2? I don't get it. Blows a kiss to Italy for Caesar Zappelli. Anyway, Zappelli's skin in the game is that he's been searching for the stone mask for years in order to destroy it, and he knows that Dio is not only still alive, but has the mask. It turns out that when he was younger, Zappelli discovered the mask while on an expedition to Mexico, but on the boat to return home, someone had put the mask on and began to slaughter the whole crew. Zappelli was the only survivor, having jumped into the ocean to escape. The man with the mask pursued him, but was vaporized when the sun came up, also revealing that the man had been the leader of the expedition, Zappelli's father. The mask was swept out to sea in the chaos, and Zappelli has made it his life's mission to find and destroy it. So, Johnathon says goodbye to Erina and goes off with this Weirdsmobile to learn sunshine magic so that he can defeat Dio. I'm going to gloss over a lot of the training because that's not really something you can describe in any way that is even remotely interesting. So, moving past that, Dio has taken up residence in a big crumbly gothic castle outside a village called Wind Knight's Lot, and him and Jack the Ripper are being a nuisance there, The town and castle used to be a training ground for royal knights, but now is mostly just populated by farmers and fishermen. Meanwhile, Speedwagon has gotten word that the poison cellar was spotted in that village, so Johnathon, Zeppeli, and Speedwagon set out toward Wind Knight's lot. En route to the town, they are ambushed in a mountain tunnel by Jack the Ripper, who is a vampire zombie now. I know how that sentence sounded, just stick with me. Anyway, Zeppeli does him most of the way in, and when Jack the Ripper escapes into the recesses of the tunnel, Zeppeli sends Johnathon after him to finish him as a final test of his training. Johnathon ends up disintegrating Jack the Ripper with hamon, and they continue on towards the village. Because they can't catch a break, they are immediately accosted by a child who steals their bag with all their money in it. Speedwagon is having kittens about the whole thing, but Zeppeli and Johnathon are nonplussed, saying that they'll just follow the kid to find the way into the village. But this boy had just been a lure to draw Johnathon into the village graveyard where Dio and his undead minions were lying in wait. And once the zombies start popping up out of the ground, it's revealed that the kid, Poco, had been controlled by Dio and has no idea what the hell is going on or how he got here. Salem woke up and he's so cute. So on top of dealing with zombies and Dio, Johnathon also has to make sure Poco doesn't become monster lunch, because he didn't have enough to deal with already. Johnathon and Zeppeli make quick work of the zombies, but then they get to Dio and it doesn't go well. Zeppeli is nearly incapacitated, Johnathon is severely injured, and Dio is fine, because of course he is. Deciding the whole thing is beneath him, he summons two undead knights. Both were men who had been loyal to Mary Stuart and who had been killed at her execution, cursing mankind as they died, and specifically England and Queen Elizabeth. With his vengeance zombies here to do the dirty work, Dio fucks off as is his wont, saying something about how he needs to get busy converting the village to his undead army. Johnathon faces off against the first knight, Bruford, and wins by the skin of his teeth. But Bruford is so impressed with his nobility that he bequeaths his sword to Johnathon before he disintegrates. But this still leaves Tarkus, who is so gigantic he makes Johnathon look frail, so they have no choice but to flee. While they're fleeing, Zeppeli gives Speedwagon an exposition dump about how after he survived his vampire shipwreck, he traveled to India in search of the mask, which is where he learned about hamon and was trained to use it under a master called Tom Petty.
Don't come around here no more.
Again, stay with me, please stay with me. Anyway, so Tom Petty trained him in the art of sunshine magic fighting, but also told him a prophecy about his death that he withholds from the group at this time. Tarkus catches up with them and forces them to flee into the ruins of the old knight training grounds, where Johnathon is tricked by Tarkus and dragged into a death match room where both people have collars attached to their necks, and the only way to escape is to behead your opponent. Tarkus is like 4 times Johnathon's size, as mentioned before, so this isn't ideal, and he is almost killed. But Poco manages to sneak into the room through a tiny window, and after a healthy bout of child violence, is able to open the door from the inside so that Zeppeli and Speedwagon can get inside. Which is when we learn via flashback that the prophecy that was given to Zeppeli via Tom Petty was, and the wording is a little different here depending on whether you're watching the anime or what translation of the manga you're reading, but basically that he would find himself in a chamber of death that would be opened by a child, where he would find a young lion chained, and that his own painful death would set the young lion free. So it's not very surprising then that Zeppeli sacrifices himself to save Johnathon. But before he dies, he passes all of his remaining hamon to him, giving Johnathon the power to beat Tarkus. They continue onward toward Wind Knight's lot, only to find the city overflowing with the undead. But not to worry, because before his demise, Zeppeli had sent a letter requesting aid for the fight against Dio. So our gang meets up with Zeppeli's old master, Tom Petty, and his disciples, Dire and Straits. God, I love this weird series. We learn that Poco's sister has been taken captive by Dio, and our perspective shifts to the crumbling Gothic castle where Dio is trying to convince Poco's sister to let him turn her into a vampire. She backhands him. Good for her. So Dio is like, okay, fine, have it your way. Enjoy my weird, disgusting monster with snakes coming out of his head that I'm gonna let eat you now. But all is not lost, because Johnathon shows up and hurls an anvil at the monster. He squares off against the monster, but he's pretty overpowered since acquiring Zeppeli's hamon, so it's a pretty short fight. Koko is reunited with his sister, and Johnathon heads upstairs to find Dio. He finds them, they grand speech at each other, and prepare to face off. But Dyer appears, saying he will be the one to defeat Dio, since he had been good friends with Zeppeli and wants to avenge him. Dio defeats him in like 2 minutes. It's not even remotely evenly matched. But Dyer does manage to blind Dio in one eye by tuxedo masking a hamon-charged rose into it before he dies. So now it's the big showdown between Dio and Johnathon. Dio, the overpowered vampire, and super caked up Johnathon with his brand new sword that he's pumped full of sunshine magic. For the first time, they're actually evenly matched. They duke it out while Straits, Tom Petty, and Speedwagon are left to fight the hordes of the undead. At one point, it seems like Dio is going to get the upper hand and turn Johnathon into one of his undead minions, but Johnathon manages to light his gloves on fire and punches a hole clean through Dio, sending a ton of hamon into him in the process. With his body being destroyed from the inside with sunlight, what's left of Dio falls over the banister, leaving Johnathon triumphant but also full of regret because he's too nice for this world and feels bad about annihilating Dio since they grew up together. But we can only celebrate so much. As long as Dio's head isn't destroyed, he can survive anything. And realizing this, he decapitates himself mid-fall to separate his head from his rapidly disintegrating body. We then see the poison seller discover Dio's head at the bottom of the cliff and run off into the night with it. We now get a small amount of exposition in the form of a newspaper article. It details how one night the majority of the population of Wind Knight's lot vanished, but a surviving farmer spotted 4 men burning a man's clothing near the old castle ruins, and specifically, one of them destroying a stone mask with a hammer. We then get a second entry dated a few months after the first, telling of Jonathan Joestar's marriage to Erina Pendleton and how they will shortly be leaving for their honeymoon in America. It turns out this is being read by Speedwagon, who realizes he's late to see off their ship and hauls ass out of there. At the dock, he runs into 4 men carrying a heavy ornate box, who mention that they have no idea what's in it, but some rich guy left money for them if they put it on the ship. Speedwagon catches up with Poco, Tom Petty, and basically every surviving ally they've made over the course of the series, and they wave Jonathan and Erina off as they depart for America. And we at least now get to see them be happy for a minute. Enjoying the ship and being cutesy with each other, it's sweet, and I love them, and I just want them to be happy. But, of course, that happiness doesn't last. While they're eating in the ship's dining room, Johnathon spots the poison seller. He tells Erina to go back to their room, lock the door, and not to let anyone in no matter what. At the same time this is happening, a drunken priest has staggered into the cargo hold and found the huge fancy box that was being loaded into the ship. Being a drunken dum-dum, he pops the thing open and is immediately eviscerated by whatever is inside it. Johnathon chases the poison seller to that same cargo hold and sees him fling the box open, removing Dio's head preserved in a case. Upon seeing Johnathon, Dio remarks, "Ah, my body is here." It's creepy. Basically, the decapitated head of Dio wants to put his head on Jonathan's body to become the ultimate being.
You still smell!
This fucking guy. I swear to God, the only good thing he's ever done is make Giorno Giovanna. Also, please give me a heterosexual explanation for this manga panel, because I don't have one. Oh, the normalcy of needing to possess your rival's body. Just guys being dudes, I guess. Anyway, obviously, Johnathon, not big on the idea of having his head chopped off so that Dio can puppet his body around. Erina arrives in the cargo hold just as Dio shoots 2 beams of energy from his eyes, punching holes through both of Jonathan's hands as well as his neck. He then takes this opportunity to evilly monologue at Erina about the whole situation. Meanwhile, the ship is being overrun with the undead. The poison seller attacks to take Jonathan's head as the undead breach the cargo hold, and a young woman falls down the steps to her death while holding a crying baby. The baby is fine, though. We don't have 2 bouts of infanticide as in this part. Wanting to save Erina from both Dio and the zombie horde, Johnathon uses his last bit of hamon to fry the heck out of the poison seller and animate his corpse to go jam up the ship's machinery so that the pressure will build up and the ship will be blown apart. Erina goes to Jonathan's side, and seeing he's mortally wounded, she tells him that she's going to die alongside him and kisses him. But Jonathan tells her that she must live, telling her to take the crying baby whose mother had just died and escape. Dio, while really mad that Johnathon is going to blow up the ship, says it's fine, because the coffin he traveled here in is not only built to withstand the sun, but explosions as well, so he's still planning to take Johnathon's body and escape using the coffin. He then attempts to behead Johnathon using these, tentacle bits that are coming out of his neck. But Johnathon manages to sever the tentacles with a piece of broken machinery and pulls Dio's head down to him and cradles it in his arms. He tells Dio that their fates have always been entwined, so it's only fitting that they die together. And with his last breath, he tells Erina to be happy before he dies holding Dio's head to his chest and the ship explodes. The story ends with narration by Erina, who had escaped the destruction in Dio's coffin along with the baby. She laments how history will never know of Johnathon's bravery and sacrifice, but says that she'll make sure his descendants all know his story, beginning with the new life she feels growing in her. And that's the end of Phantom Blood. We're back to covering happy stories on this channel. Phantom Blood is steeped in gothic horror, and this was truly by design. In a 2020 interview with Kotoba Magazine, Jojo's creator Hirohiko Araki stated, "The origins of Jojo lie in vampire myths. Fear doesn't necessarily come from evil, but it plays an important role in heightening suspense. At the same time, it can also be a wonderful seasoning to make a villain stand out. When I thought about what is most terrifying, I considered such things as a strong and violent person, or someone with an invincible weapon. I realized that being attacked by something you have no memory of, such as a curse passed down from your ancestors, is profound and especially scary. That's where Jojo started from, the idea of being cursed without realizing it, as well as a horror that threatens from across eras, were combined with the idea of a vampire myth to create Jojo. When the series first began in the late 80s, works dealing with serial killers and bizarre murders, such as Silence of the Lambs, originally published in 1988, were becoming popular. Another story that made an impression on me was one about a criminal who commits an act of violence once every 17 years. Even though he goes into hiding for a while, is he just going to do it all over again in 17 years? Who the hell is he? The existence of such a character is terrifying, and the structure of a mind that can't understand its own actions is far more terrifying than I could have imagined. This is furthered in the commentary he provided in the literature provided for the Phantom Blood musical adaptation, saying, "When the series first started, I wanted to draw a noble, adventurous spirit amid the dark and gothic mood of a horror suspense story." Yes, there is a Phantom Blood musical. No, I haven't seen it, and I'm very upset about that, so let's move on, please. As I've posited, Phantom Blood is steeped in horror, and specifically the gothic horror genre. But I would like to drill down further here, as I believe that Phantom Blood, specifically, continues in the tradition of the Victorian penny dreadful. So, first we need to discuss what exactly a penny dreadful was. In the early 19th century, technology was seeing significant improvements as a result of the Industrial Revolution. Also at this point, education was being more democratized, which saw a rise in literacy that hadn't been present before this, specifically literacy in the working class, due in large part to the Education Acts of 1870 and 1880. But this time, novels were more or less seen as a commodity of the upper class, and the ability to afford books was basically a status symbol. So this also made novels somewhat inaccessible to lower income brackets. That paired with the fact that the working class still had to, work, meant they didn't have time to laze about reading novels like their richer contemporaries. They needed literature that was cheap, portable, and short. This gave way to a wave of short serialized fiction that was printed on cheap wood pulp paper, printed at a mass scale and priced at, as the name would imply, 1 penny. Whereas at this time, Charles Dickens' serialized stories were sold for $1, which was roughly 12 times that. Manon Burrs-Lebrande describes it as such in Penny Dreadfuls, the circulation patterns of Victorian popular genre. Serialization as a publishing practice indicates a significantly different approach to literature as a whole, as it marks a strong departure from the consumption practices of the novel. Indeed, it was not only tied to the mode of production and writing of literature, the notion of seriality is equally relevant in terms of perception of the material, i.e., how it was read. The growing practice of serialization impacted the consumption of literature as it reimagined and redefined its definition. The novel, which was as much a literary story as it was an item that belonged on a shelf and within the closed space of the domestic sphere, was therefore consumed in a vastly different way from popular penny literature. The acquisition of a book was the acquisition of a commodity. Reading thus acquired a different status through the rise of periodical fiction, as the marketplace did not depend exclusively on books that should be displayed side by side like medals on a shelf, but evolved to provide a more mass-reading, working-class appropriate format, thanks to the use of seriality in cheap, short numbers. So, these works were cheap, portable, and short. But due to this format, they also need to be attention-grabbing, so these works, especially the early ones, were sensationalized stories full of gore and horror. They came to be known as penny bloods, or by the press and disapproving upper class as penny dreadfuls due to their, well, dreadful subject matter. These frequently contain stories about gruesome murders, violent highwaymen, and vampires, with popular characters like Sweeney Todd, Spring Hill Jack, and predecessor to Dracula, Varney the Vampire, first gaining life in these publications. As noted in E.S. Turner's book on penny publications, Boys Will Be Boys, popular fiction of the early 19th century was steeped in darkness and diablerie. Spectres gliding in a green phosphorescence, hags picking over the bones of charnel houses, death sheds in closets, heirs to great estates chained in dungeons, forests stuffed with robbers and werewolves, graves creaking open in the moonlight to let the vampires out. These were the stock in trade of the Gothic and bogus Gothic novelist. Also, due to the audience being lower to lower middle working class, they mostly featured a working class protagonist, or at the very least, really bad things happening to the upper class. If a rich person wasn't dying or being tortured in a penny dreadful, they were, at the very least, probably the laughingstock of the piece, since the rich buffoon was a popular archetype. Initially, these were aimed at working class adults, but as is the case with things like, Five Nights at Freddy's, things often originally intended for an adult audience have a way of attracting a younger demographic. And one of the largest readerships of these became children, specifically younger and teenage boys, especially in the later half of the century. This caused a shift in the subject matter somewhat as writers and publishers recognized this new audience and gave the publications the additional name of boys' books. This is not entirely dissimilar to the birth of shonen manga or boys' comics in Japan. As prior to the shonen genre emerging, early manga in the 19th century was satirical and critical of the government upper classes. In their paper, Manga Culture in Japan, Kinko Ito writes, "One of the most important functions of Japanese manga in its long history is satire, and the satire of authority was most dynamic during the civil rights and political reform movement, known as Jiu Minkan Undo, the freedom and people rights movement. The popular movement started at the beginning of the Meiji period, 1868 to 1912. The so-called manga journalism emerged at this time, and manga started to influence Japanese political scenes as well. There are various factors that contributed to the emergence of mass production of manga satire in a very short time. The development of infrastructures such as transportation and mail service, and the heightening of the civil rights movement also contributed to the process. Manga became a true medium of the masses. The freedom and people's rights movements was an anti-government movement by speech, and manga played an important role as part of the speech. The main media was a weekly magazine by Fumio Nomura. The objects of Nomura's satire were not limited to the government. They included the emperor and the royal family, and the Japanese government often opposed Nomura. The magazine increased its sales as the freedom and people's rights movements became more popular. It wasn't until the late 1950s that there was a shift away from media considered adult, and shonen manga or boys' comics arrived on the scene, like the shift of the more adult dreadfuls to boys' books. I know that might have been a stretch. Thank you for staying with me. With that history lesson out of the way, you are likely asking, in what way does Phantom Blood resemble the Penny Dreadful? Good question. I do want to make it clear when I'm discussing Phantom Blood in relation to Penny Dreadfuls, I'm doing this purely in themes, not in quality. Penny Dreadfuls were often poorly written schlock that forgot and changed whole plot points and dragged on as long as possible to make as much money as they could. I don't think this of Jojo. As I have established, love Jojo. Okay, back to our discussion. To begin with, Penny Dreadfuls were characterized by containing aspects of melodrama, the supernatural, crime, and violence and gore. We hit all of those in the first installment of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. The plight of young Johnathon is full of heightened emotions and drama. Much of his story is, but the first half of Phantom Blood especially. Next, the supernatural. Easy. Our main villain is a literal vampire who is capable of creating undead thralls en masse, and our hero has, for all intents and purposes, sunshine magic. For our crime aspect, we have murder, we have thieves, not to mention the whole of Ogre Street, which is populated seemingly with nothing but caricatures of Victorian criminals, and hey, let's not forget that for good measure, we have Jack the Ripper. And as far as violence and gore, we have a lot of violence and gore. Much like Penny Dreadfuls, Phantom Blood, and the JoJo series as a whole, is characterized by suspenseful serializations with chapters ending in cliffhangers. Even if you have never seen or read Jojo, I know you know the to be continued meme. This next theme can be further seen if you consider, as posited in Super Eyepatch Wolf's excellent video on Phantom Blood, that it is truly Dio's and not Johnathon's story. An idea that is kind of backed up by Araki himself in the author's commentary in the Jojonium printing of Phantom Blood, where he says, "The title of the series is Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, but first and foremost, I actually wanted to draw Dio. Good and evil, white and black, Johnathon and Dio function as symbols and are foils of one another. The series had the potential to go on, so in my mind, I wanted to create a first Joestar that could function as a symbol of purity and dignity rather than a unique, fresh character. That's why it was hard to come up with him. There are limitations on how I could write the character because he was a symbol of justice, so he may be a little on the boring side. I solidified his character as I went. Johnathon is passive, reacting to Dio's various attacks, and this leads to him discovering his way of life. Perhaps this is linked to me as an author growing along with my character as I drew him. Just as Johnathon was unsure of how to live his life, I was unsure where to take the character. Maybe I grew as an author a little with Johnathon as he trudged on through his hardships." So, looking at it from that angle, if you consider Phantom Blood to be more Dio's story than Johnathon's, you can see this as Dio's origin story, with him rising to power over 100 years later in Part 3 Stardust Crusaders. And a large proponent of the Penny Dreadful was to create tales in which the impoverished rise to power and the aristocracy or upper classes are subjected to horrors and disgrace. Dio comes from nothing. He's raised by a penniless and alcoholic father in complete squalor, but manages to first make his way into the Joestar estate and fortune, torturing upper-class Johnathon the whole time, and rises to the ultimate power of being a nearly supreme being. Another tie into the theme of the Penny Dreadful can be seen as almost a callback to the Penny Dreadful publication Varney the Vampire. Varney the Vampire deals with the Bannerworth family who, after the death of their father, much like Johnathon, is terrorized by the titular Varney, who in addition to just being a pain in the ass, is intent on driving the family out of Bannerworth Hall, much like Dio means to drive George and Johnathon, and by drive I mean murder, out of the Joestar mansion. Much like Varney just generally ruining the lives of the Bannerworths, Dio is literally a problem for the Joestar family as a whole bloodline. Long after Johnathon's death, he comes back to ruin the lives of Holly, Joseph, and Jotaro in Part 3, and honestly, also to posthumously ruin Jolene's life in Part 6. So he is truly a multi-generational menace, but his tie into Part 6 is a whole other can of worms. Plus, if you count what seemed to be some revisionism on Araki's part, it also follows suit in how Varney is completely killed off only to return later, much like how Dio is thoroughly obliterated in an explosion that there is no way he could have escaped from, especially considering that Erina escaped with baby Lisa in his explosion-proof coffin, but somehow Dio comes back with Johnathon's body that also somehow survived the blast to be the antagonist of Stardust Crusaders, and at some point make Giorno Giovanna. Again, the only good thing this man has done. I'm dying on this hill and will not be taking notes. With that, I may have reached the end of my attempt at a scholarly, or at least moderately well-researched and hopefully kind of compelling essay about Phantom Blood. So, what do you say we go get some pie? Yay, sunshine pie. I'll set a piece out by the fireplace tonight for Johnathon Joestar. And look at us getting back to normal monthly releases. That'll show the horrors to keep us down, and hopefully soon the old ones will deem us worthy of returning to the diner's original state. So, what's your favorite horror, or dare I say, bizarre, anime or manga series? Drop your thoughts on the work, the food, and what your favorite scary or truly strange anime or manga is in the comments below. Recipe, recommendations, and sources are also listed in the description below. And hey, if you enjoyed your stay here, maybe you'd think about liking and subscribing to see what we cook up next. And if you want to go even further, we've got a Patreon. A lot goes on in front of and behind the camera to make these videos, and every little bit helps us keep the lights on in the diner and the gas on in the stoves. Patrons get fun perks like getting episodes early, access to the Horror Diner Discord, and possibly even exclusive cat pictures. And patrons $5 or more get to be part of the Horror Diner Book Club, where every month you vote on a book for me to cover. You can read along with me, and then I make an exclusive video on that just for you on Patreon. We've covered things like Bitterthorn by Kat Dunn, We Used to Live Here by Marcus Cleawer, What Hunger by Catherine Dang, The Sound of the Dark by Daniel Church, and I'll Make a Spectacle of You by Beatrice Winifred Eicher. It's neat! Patreons of all level also get to enjoy exclusive content, like me having a mental breakdown after watching Return to Silent Hill. You can find that linked in the description as well as links as to where you can find us at on Instagram, Bluesky, TikTok, and now on Tumblr. This has been Phantom Blood, I've been Spooky Pie, and you have been amazing. Y'all come back now, you hear? This beautiful, beautiful man. Merlin. Hi, you want to come up? Did you just want to come in here and yell at me for a while? Apparently it was the second option. Okay. The internet has barely seen what you look like. I'll make an appearance. Whoa, I hit my thing. I hit my teleprompter. Ooh, or an anime that is turning 14 years this old. Years this old. And the camera cuts it off, but his little feet are so cute. Hi, Merlin. You want to bring me your kill? She's murdered a toy. She's brought it to me for dinner. Dio has taken up residence in a big, crumbly Gothic castle. As I've posited, Phantom Blood is steeped in horror, and specifically, and a Florida girl who is wrongly imprisoned in order to save her father from a priest who's in love with the guy who murdered their great ancestor. I have to take that part again because my mouse fell off my lap.